Welcome everyone, today I have a new guide for Diablo 4, and today we'll be looking into the Barbarian Rend Rupture Ultimate Bleeding build. And what we'll do with the usual build video is, we'll briefly go through the skill choices for each of the sections of the skills, and then we'll talk about the max level with level 50 with 15 Reno, and also the Codex aspects. Those are quite interesting and will have a lot of potentials. And finally, we'll go have a look at the level 25 or 26 for the open beta, where we can only get to this level. So very interesting for this particular build because it's a lot of synergies, we can apply a lot of stuns, we can apply explosions, so much bleeding, and I'm quite excited to try this out in the open beta and when the game's launched. So coming over to a summary of the choices of skills. For basic skill, we'll go with Flay. Now Flay will give us additional bleed debuff and also vulnerability debuff, which is quite nice, and we also need those points for the future skills. After that, we'll go with a core skill with Rend. This will be our core damage for damage over time for bleeding. Now we just need one more point in defensive skills to get to the next part, and here I just picked the 5% HP. For Brawling, we'll be picking both Warcry and also Leap for survivability and also for increased damage. And as to weapon mastery, we also have a core burst DPS. Rend is gonna bleed the enemy, while Rapture is gonna turn those bleeding damage into instant burst damage. And this will give us a lot of damage suddenly, with a lot of good passives like Hamstring and also Cut to the Bone we can make use of. Finally, we'll go with the ultimate skill with Wrath of Berserker. Because some of the passives and also skills we pick will also give us Berserk, getting some of the Berserker upgrade and also getting some of the other passives will give us more damage and also more regeneration and also more recovery. As for Capstone, we'll be going with the Gushing wound, and this will turn our bleeding damage into AoE bleeding explosions. So coming over here, let's go over to the max level over here and let's go through the skills, and we'll also touch on the Codex. So what you want to keep in mind is, I'll just briefly talk about the Codex. In the Codex, we'll be doing bleeding, and on top of bleeding, we'll be doing critical, of course, because everyone wants to crit, right? And on top of that, we'll be doing stuns and also slows to enemies. So a lot of aspects that provide us a tremendous boost of damage, like 30% over here, and also the 40% over here, is going to be very good for this build. So coming over to the basic skills, I have picked 1 point in Flay and also 2 of the upgrades. Now I thought about taking away this upgrade with Battle Flay, but actually we need the point, so I just kept it. After that, with the core skills, 5 point into Rend, and also we'll be going with Enhanced Rend and also Violent Rend, which will give us increased damage to enemies who's already bleeding, which is pretty nice, because we want all the buffs to bleeding, right? Now in terms of defensive skills, I didn't pick any defensive skills, and there are some reasons behind it. We'll have other perks which restore HP by Spinning Fury, by bleeding, and also we have other defensive perks by stunning enemies. So we just need one more point over here to get to the next part. Now because we want to do as much damage as we can, we'll go with a battle cry that boosts our damage by at least 15% with Warcry, and also by another 15% if you're around enemies. Now in order to get around enemies, what you can do is you can leap into enemies. So 1 point into leap, and also, the leaping gain fury will give us enough fury to cast our core skill. And while you're inside of 4 enemies, you gain additional damage by doing the battle cry. Now here I did pick the Booming Voice and also the Swiftness, just get as a 30% more duration with the battle cry, and also here with some movement. It is optional to pick those, and you might not have to pick those at the very start. I also went with aggressive resistance to get more defensiveness with berserking, because as you can see over here, we can be getting berserking when battle cry, and later we'll have the berserk skill available. So this means we have more defensiveness because we didn't pick that many defensive skills at the start. Now coming over to the weapon mastery, and this is going to be the fun part. We'll be going with level 5 Rapture, and together with Enhanced Rapture and also Fighter's Rapture. Rapture will allow us to do a upfront damage for only about 14%, but then it will translate all of your bleeding damage into instant damage, and this will mean you can do tremendous damage to the enemy. On top of that, if you do kill the enemy with the 14% direct damage, you will reset your Rapture cooldown, and if you do not kill them, you'll increase the bleeding damage taken, and this will bleed them to death with your core skill Rend. Finally, if we want to get more survivability, when we kill the enemy with Rapture, we can get 15% life back. And if you kill at least 3 or 4, you get maximum life back. Now if you want more attack speed and also more damage, you can go with a Warrior's Rapture as well. But I went with more defensive perk over here because I think we don't have any defensive skills over here. Now, something really interesting passive for the bleeding build is going to be Hamstring. And this particular passive is going to be essential because the bleeding will slow enemy by 30%. This will also keep you, more defensive as well when enemies are slowed. So after that, Cut to the Bone will increase the damage dealt to enemy who are vulnerable. Now keep in mind, we have the vulnerability over here with the Battle Flay, and also we can pick the exposed vulnerability as well. So it is optional to pick the Slaying Strike or exposed vulnerability. I can mix up a little bit if we need more vulnerability. Because if you want the vulnerability, getting 1.5 or even getting up to 4.5 seconds is good. But the rotation of the skill is, we will do Rend, then we will do Rapture. But the combination of this passive wants you to do Rapture first, then Rend. So it's a little backwards, that's why I didn't pick this one too much. But if you do need more vulnerability for your bleeding effect, you can pick this particular perk as well. And also for the passive over here, we'll go with Speed Fighter because we'll be melee range, and this will give us damage reduction as well to the distance damage. We'll go with No Mercy because we'll constantly slow enemy with bleeding, and this is just a free damage boost. And we'll be stunning enemies as well, you'll see very soon. So stunning and also slowing means we get free damage boost. If you guys have seen our previous video, we talk about a lot of terms in Diablo. Initially I thought injured enemies are for enemies below 80% HP, but it turns out it is for enemies below 35% HP. So make sure you check out the previous video about the terms and different status for Diablo 3 or Diablo 4. So, and also for the healthy enemies it's above 80% HP. For the injured enemies it is below 35% HP. So initially I thought this one was, this is under 80%, so that'll be too good, right? So make sure you know the correction over here for this key term and also for the passive. Now coming over to the ultimate, we'll be going with the Wrath of Berserker for Unstoppable and also for the attack speed increase and also for the damage increase, movement speed increase, and also Fury Gain. So the Wrath of Berserker seems to be the best. Now of course you can argue that you can go with the Iron Maelstrom and you'll get the additional bleeding damage for 126%. But because we're doing so much bleeding with Rend and also Rapture combined, I don't think we need this one, especially at a 60-second cooldown. I'd rather have more buffs to the Rapture, I guess. I'd rather have more buffs to the Berserker to give us a bit more survivability and also overall, bleedingness. And this also fits into the Codex, as you're going to see very soon, because Berserking will give us better bleeding effects as well. Now, in terms of passive, I'm going with Heavy-Handed, and in terms of weapon choices, we do want the two-handed weapon. So coming over to the arsenal section with Expertise, what you're going to see is, with the two-handed sword, direct damage dealt is inflict as bleeding damage, and this will give us, more bleeding damage if we use two-handed sword for bleeding. So keep that in mind for the arsenal system, you want the two-handed sword over here. So coming back over here, we'll go with the two-handed, and this will increase our critical strike damage. And after that, because I want more survivability, it is optional. If you're strong enough, you don't need those perks, because this one will just give you maximum 3 Fury, and Invigorating Fury will heal you for the Fury you spent. Those 4 points are definitely optional. You can allocate those if you want more vulnerability, you can allocate this if you want more Berserking with Leap, or you can go with Fury Generation, you can go with maximum HP. It is very optional for those last 4 points, because I thought, just more survivability. And ultimately, our Capstone is going to be a cornerstone that gives us a lot of burst damage, because killing a bleeding enemy creates an explosion that inflicts more bleeding over time. Let's say if you have a group of 5 or 10 enemies, you kill one, it will become AoE bleeding for everybody else. You kill 4, all of a sudden everybody else will be bleeding, and they will be bleeding a lot. So what ideally you want to do is, as to the skill order, you might see a pack of enemies. You can leap into the enemies and cast Warcry. After casting Warcry, if it's just not that strong of a pack, you don't have to cast Wrath of Berserker. Then you can, start with your Rend, because Warcry and also Leap will give you more Fury, and especially with the Leap that gives you 40 Fury. You'll be casting Rend to bleed enemies. And at this time, you can cast Rapture after bleeding them to give them an instant burst and killing some of them. By killing some of them, you'll be gaining HP and also doing AoE bleeding again. And then, if you wanted, you can start casting Flay for more Fury again. And finally, if you wanted more, you can be casting more Rend to finish them off, because enemies will be on low HP, which allows you to do, a lot more damage. Now coming over to the Codex of Power. So over here what we're going to see is the Codex of Power is a little bit similar. So if you had a look at our previous build, if you haven't, definitely have a look at the Whirlwind build. Some of the core codex is similar, but others are tailor-made for the bleeding build. So let's go have a look. Now we're going with Aspect of Might and also Aspect of Numbing Worth. I think those two are very good in terms of defensive, and also most of the Berserkers or Barbarians can use that. And after that, we'll go with Edgemaster and also Aspect of Expectant. Those two are okay. You might take this away as well if you don't do your basic skill a lot. And I guess the Edgemaster is because you have quite a bit of Fury for increased damage. I guess the corners, like the corner aspects over here, the core aspects, will be the aspect of Berserk Raping. So for this one, we're dealing direct damage while Berserking will inflict 22% of the base damage dealt as bleeding over time. This will give us more bleeding, right? On top of that, if you guys remember, we'll be stunning enemies. So one way to stun enemy is that we have the 15% chance to stun enemies when they hit you, and we deal increased damage for 30% when enemies are stunned. So this means you want to stun enemies, and this gives you passive to stun enemies, and this is for distant enemy, of course. Now, this is a defensive and also offensive codex. Together with Aspect of Pummeling, we'll get another 40% increased damage when enemies are stunned. Now you may be wondering, how do you get more stunnings? Because this is just a passive distance stun, right? So I guess the next cornerstone, I guess the core utility codex is going to be over here. We'll be going with Aspect of Armenia, and this allows you to direct damage against bleeding enemies have 31% chance to stun for 2 seconds. So what that means is you'll be bleeding enemies, and most of your skill have direct damage. As you cast direct damage, they will be stunned. And as you stun them, all of a sudden you gain like 40% and 30% increased damage. And together with over here, you will be doing a lot more increased damage, 30% more to the stun enemies, and also 23% because they're pretty much below 80% HP. So there's a lot of damage multipliers over here for you to take advantage of. And this build is, defensively because you're stunning enemies. Now, I also forgot to mention that we can also be going with aspects of Quickening Pulse, because this is quite important, because we'll get the 20% chance of reducing cooldown of no ultimate skills by 1.5 seconds when we inflict bleeding onto elites. There wouldn't be that many elites, but when they are elites and you really need those cooldowns, this will become very powerful. So make sure you guys remind yourself of these aspects, because you'll be doing a bleeding build for the lower cooldowns. Now, as we go over to the resource codex, it's pretty straightforward. We'll go with a chance to, gain Fury when Rend deals direct damage on at least one bleeding enemy. And this is also goes with similar different Rend combination, right? So this is going to be a pretty nice niche to get more Fury. And we'll go with Unrelenting Fury to gain more Fury back. If you have enough Fury, you don't need this codex. But those two codex are pretty much giving us Fury. This one is universal, and this one's for bleeding only. So make your choices. If you can have both, you can go with both. Now we talk about the stunning passive, which is going to be massive, and also the standard ones for the Berserker. So here we'll increase Berserk duration when we have core skill dealing damage. And this effect is also doubled when we critical hit. We'll also be gaining movement speed when we critical hit. Now, unlike the Whirlwind build, which does gain a lot of innate critical hit up to 20%. So here we don't have that much critical hit. So I do think if we're going with different stats, maybe we want to allocate more points into DX over STR, but it's hard balance. I was thinking maybe 4-1 or 3-1, so 3 STR and 1 DX. I haven't thought exactly about the selection of the stats, and let me know in the comments, guys, what do you think about the stats for this build. Now, because in the beta, we'll be on about level 25, 26 with more Reno points. We'll be on level 25, but we might get some more skill points. So here I made a build for the bleeding build for the open beta for level 25 with a few of the Reno points. So coming over to the level 25 Barbarian skill tree, the level 26 just because you might have 1 renown points. So level 1 to Flay and going with all the passives, and we'll be going for level 5 with Rend, and similarly with the previous combos. And as we go here, everything's pretty much similar. We'll go with level 1 of Warcry and level 1 of Leap, and we take all those good passives. And finally, we'll go with level 5 with Rapture, and this will give us a tremendous upgrade. So not only you have Rend, you also have Rapture to level 5 and all of its passives. And ultimately, we'll go with 1 rank to the Wrath of Berserker. It is optional if you want to go with this one. You can go with something else as well. And maybe we can go with one point in Iron Skin instead of the Wrath of Berserker if you don't find yourself using the, the ultimate a lot. So this is level 25 build, and let me know what you guys think. Quite excited for this build. Now, I've been looking at different builds, so I did the Warring build, and I did the Rapture Bleeding build with my friend. So what I'm thinking is I might do a tanky build in the future for the Barbarians, because we have Thorn while Berserking, and we also have the AoE damage for Thorns. I might look into that, and maybe a dual-handed Berserker with infinite attack speed. So let me know what you guys think about those Berserker builds, and we'll be looking into other class builds very soon, and as I dive into them, we'll try to make at least 2 or 3 different builds for each of the classes. Now before you go, and if you guys didn't know, we have a new YouTube channel. So I just started a YouTube channel with my girlfriend yesterday, and you can see this is only 12 hours old, this YouTube channel. And if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe and check out the behind the scenes and also fun clips and also more stories about us. And then you get to know me a little more personally instead of just reading the news and also the games, right? So I want to share a little bit more with you guys. So make sure you check this channel out if you're interested about Matt and also Uni. She's really funny too, and she's really shy. So I want to give her a surprise and do a shout out for the new channel to get some subscribers. Thank you guys. I'll see you guys next time.